I did not know that this was going on, but, artists suing record labels is not a terribly unusual thing, it would seem. And usually when we talk about one of these stories, it's usually Universal Music Group that is being sued. But this time it was not. This time it was Sony Music. It's funny because when Al was on the show, we were talking a lot about the 90s. Well, there's a 90s band called Lit who had a song you might remember, a pop punk song called My Own Worst Enemy. And they have just settled a streaming royalty lawsuit with Sony Music. Again, artists suing labels over royalties is not a new thing. And that predates the internet. That predates streaming. It is not unusual for an artist or an accountant who works for an artist and so on and so forth, a business manager who might work for an artist, to at some point in time say, hey, I think we're missing some money. I don't think, this my client here has been selling millions of records and they're only getting a small pittance. And the legal department looked at the contract and apparently there should be a lot more money than what is currently going to my client, etc. So maybe we need to sue the label over that. It's not a new story. Now, taking that and applying it to the era of streaming, which we're in, that part is somewhat new, although not really that new in 2026. Streaming's been around for a couple decades now, but these stories continue. But I didn't know that this one was going on. I didn't know that Lit was suing Sony Music. It says here, and again, this is from musicbusinessworldwide.com, which if you're a regular listener, one of my absolute favorite sites for music industry news. It says, Lit, the band behind pop punk hit My Own Worst Enemy, settles Sony Music streaming royalty lawsuit. Lit, the rock band behind the 1999 single My Own Worst Enemy, has settled its lawsuit against Sony Music Entertainment over streaming royalties. Never liked that song, by the way. Not that I don't like Lit. They're fine. I just don't like that song. The band and the major label reached a settlement in principle, according to a July 7 court filing reviewed by Music Business Worldwide. Neither Lit nor Sony has disclosed the terms, and a written agreement is still being finalized. U.S. District Court John P. Cronin closed the case on Tuesday after being notified of the deal, which was first reported by Billboard. The members of Lit sued Sony in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York in March over their streaming royalties. The complaint was brought by frontman A.J. Popoff, guitarist Jeremy Popoff, I assume they're brothers, bassist Kevin, unless Popoff is a common name, which it's not, bassist Jeremy Baldez, and the estate of late drummer Alan Schellenberger, as Music Business Worldwide reported at the time. Sony, which acquired RCA Records years after the label signed the band in 1998, had been paying the musicians a 14% U.S. royalty rate on streams. Quick note here before we go any further. That's another thing that happens a lot. Consolidation, right? One record label buys another record label. Now all of a sudden, some of the artists who are on the record label that got bought, they're not getting their money. Or, there's a term that I learned a couple of years ago that is common it describes a practice common in the music business. Spaghetti accounting, which is where the accounting is done in such a way that it makes it very more convoluted than it necessarily needs to be, which makes it hard to do forensic accounting, which is when you try to figure out where the money is going and why some of the money isn't going where it should be, and or why not enough of the money is going where it should be going, etc. But this is the thing. When one record label buys another, if you're on the record label that's being purchased, again, this is something where if you're that artist, you want your legal team, you want your management, whomever is keeping an eye on this, you want them in there making sure that you're getting everything that you have coming to you. It says here, the band argued the 1998 RCA contract entitled it to 50% of net receipts whenever a master is licensed, treating an on-demand stream as a master use license rather than a sale. So master being the master recording of the song, which is obviously what gets distributed to these streaming platforms, because the streaming platforms, obviously you want the platform to have the highest possible quality file of your music if you're an artist on a platform, right? But according to the band argues, or their legal team argues, according to their RCA contract, they're entitled to 50% of net receipts when the master is licensed. So in this case, the master is licensed to a streaming platform. So 50% of that revenue that's generated by that track on that platform. So continuing on, again, this article from Music Business Worldwide. In a parenthetical, the band's 1998 contract gave an example of such a license. Quote, RCA's license to another person of the right to embody a master recording on a website in a so-called streaming format, which is not subject to the digital download of that master recording by a viewer, unquote. When the 1998 deal was signed, Napster had not yet launched, and streaming services such as Rhapsody did not arrive until the early 2000s. Lit claimed the language entitled it to more than $800,000 in unpaid streaming royalties. The band's attorney, Chris Vallejos, in the complaint said, quote, Sony's failure and or refusal to account properly to plaintiffs for streaming royalties received from licenses from third-party DSPs, digital service providers, under the 1998 agreement has damaged plaintiffs in excess of $800,000 in unpaid royalties as reflected on royalty statements rendered from January 1, 2021 through December 31, 2026, unquote. The complaint also alleged that Sony used the wrong formula for video streaming royalties and that it never applied the escalated rate its deal called for once A Place in the Sun, which is the album that song was on, reached gold and platinum status. That's, the song My Own Worst Enemy. That's from the album A Place in the Sun. Reduced royalty reporting had also lowered the band's pension contributions and affected its health insurance eligibility through SAG-AFTRA, the complaint said. According to the complaint, the band had tried to renegotiate since 2023, but Sony offered a half-hearted defense of the rate before it stopped responding. Vallejos said in March, quote, this is something that we were hoping we could resolve before having to file a lawsuit, unquote. A lawyer for Sony later said in a May court filing that the band had begun settlement talks after suing, according to Billboard. MBW, Music Business Worldwide, has reached out to Sony and Lit's management team at Shelter Music Group for comment. The case landed as Sony faces other royalty claims in the same New York court. Again, as I said, this is a common story. And these labels use spaghetti accounting to make it very difficult to figure out exactly what's going on, what is not happening that should be happening, and so forth. They make it very complicated for a reason. For the same reason anybody who makes their accounting very complicated does so. It's not even necessarily, I don't know, that they're trying to hide stuff, but they're certainly trying to make it so it's not easy to find. I guess that is in effect hiding something, but they don't want you to figure out how, Universal Music Group, we talked about this on the show. Universal Music Group, and again, not to conflate them with Sony, but they've been sued a bunch. I don't know whatever happened to it, but we talked about it on the show. Limp Bizkit was suing Universal Music Group because apparently UMG, if you're an artist on UMG, you are provided with a portal. It almost sounds like, like if you have a bank account and you use your portal to check your banking information, your balance and whatever, you log into the portal, right? UMG actually has a portal for their artists, their signed artists, where they can log in and check what's going on with their royalties, how much they're owed, or how much they might owe in recoupment, which is another subject. We won't take that side street right now, but you can check all that through this portal. But apparently, the portals don't always work. Limp Bizkit's accountant was accounting firm was trying to sign into the portal at one point, and they didn't have the right password, and they tried to create a new password, but the portal wouldn't let them, so they had to I mean, really, this is wild, right? That this goes on. And then so they tried to contact somebody at Universal Music Group so they could update their password so they could get into the portal, but no one was getting back to them. This is how these labels treat their artists. It's just a fact. This is how these artists are treated. And you can say, well, I don't really care how somebody who's rich and famous is treated by their record label. What's it matter? They're rich and famous. So what? Talk about your first world problems. I get that, but it doesn't just happen to artists who are already rich and famous. You know, the guys from Lit, they had that one huge hit. I don't remember if they had any others. If they did, I'm not remembering them, which makes me think, and I have a pretty good memory for that, but I don't always remember everything. So maybe they did. I don't remember. I remember them being really big off of that song for a short period of time. But I can tell you this, being really big off of one song for a short period of time does not make you rich. It helps. It doesn't make you rich. Being really big over a prolonged period of time might make you rich. But if you have one hit song and one platinum album, you're not, I mean, unless you take really good care of your money and you invest it and all that, but just based on that alone, that income alone, you're not wealthy for the rest of your life based on that. So, no one should be treated this way by a record label. This is why there's so much antipathy toward the major labels, the major label system. When do you ever hear anyone say something nice about Universal Music Group or Sony or Warner Brothers or any of these labels? When do you ever hear anybody say, they really, if you're signed to that label, they really treat you right. They really take care of the artists. I mean, that's gone. I mean, now, even if they do sign you, they want you to already be a ready-made package, which that part I understand. They want you to already be, at the very least, internet famous before they're going to make you really famous, right? Or try to. But it's a terrible system. I mean, they really abuse their artists. Okay, so getting back to the article, because there's an example here of what I'm talking about. And again, this is from musicbusinessworldwide.com. It says here, Jermaine Dupri and his So-So Def companies sued Sony for more than $18 million on Monday, July 6th, alleging unpaid and underreported royalties on records by Criss Cross, Escape, Usher, and Mariah Carey. $18 million. Now, I understand just because they're suing for that doesn't mean that is accurate and that they are actually owed that much money. But it wouldn't shock me. Especially, well, let's look at that phrase, alleging unpaid and underreported royalties. That's part of how, and again, that plays into the spaghetti accounting, underreported. In other words, some royalties are reported, but some are not. Why would you do that? Well, if you report enough royalties and you pay out enough in royalties, maybe no one gets suspicious. Maybe no one starts asking questions. Maybe no one says, let's look at the books and figure out if we're actually getting all that we're supposed to, because we probably are, because we're getting money. But what if you're actually owed more money? So, they're not just going to forget to pay you. They're going to pay you something. They might just not pay you everything that you're owed. Because as long as they pay you something, maybe you won't start snooping around. Because if you hire a forensic accounting firm and you start snooping around, you're going to find out that you're owed a lot more than what they are telling you that you're owed. So that suit is for $18 million. It says here, that suit is active, and Sony has said the parties were attempting to resolve the accounting dispute before Dupri went to court. Sony has settled similar claims before. The company reached a settlement in 2018 with 19 recordings. The record label behind American Idol alumni, including Kelly Clarkson and Carrie Underwood, which had accused Sony of underpaying streaming royalties by accounting for streams as sales rather than licenses. In 2020, Sony agreed to pay $12.7 million to settle a class action brought by the estate of 1950 singer Rick Nelson over royalties on foreign streaming revenue. Such disputes have become more common as legacy artists challenge how labels calculate streaming royalties under contracts signed before Spotify. Lit continues to tour with dates booked across 2026. My Own Worst Enemy has drawn more than 580 million streams on Spotify. According to the band's complaint, it spent 11 weeks at number one on Billboard's alternative airplay chart. The band's 1999 album, A Place in the Sun, was certified platinum in the U.S. Lit released its most recent album, Tastes Like Gold, in 2022. The dismissal gives the parties 45 days to restore the case if the written settlement is not completed. Yeah, and again, they probably need that money. The band probably needs that money. One platinum album, one big hit song, that does not make you rich. You're not set for life based on that. I promise you, you're not. It's like, we kind of were talking about that a little bit with Al from the band I when we were talking during our conversation about, people have misconceptions and misperceptions about how this all works. They think you get signed and now you're famous and you're rich, and you can be very famous and be broke. It happened to TLC when they released their album Crazy Sexy Cool in the late 90s. They were triple platinum and they were broke because of the way their record deal was structured. They had no money. And they'd sold 3 million copies of that album on the strength of singles like Creep and Waterfalls and all that. I mean, it's the system is all, look, this is true in life in general, right? The system is always against you. You got to fight for every little crumb because the system is always trying to screw you in some way. In this case, it happens to be the major label system of these record companies. But they're always trying to screw somebody over. And they'll do whatever they can get away with.